Great. Thank you. Aidan, do you have a question? Or I think, not sure. So
I
if
changed
not,
my
Miguel.
mind. Thank you.
Okay. Miguel.
Well, I was thinking if Aidan, I wonder, Jan, if broadening dynamics is meaning at the end a new type of leadership, perhaps more distributed, with not more with new responsibilities, new missions, in order to evolve the whole organization from those instrumental levels to a higher developmental levels. If I wonder if the leadership has a role, a special role in that.
Well, that's a very good question. I would see it as an invitation for all of us. What do we think? I think there is indeed a potential for a new kind of leadership, a leadership that focuses on the potential in managing the potential in the tensions, a leader that really acts as a sounding board to identify critical relationships, a leader that helps identify ongoing changes and acts from a more encompassing, holistic point of view. And that's already happening at this moment. So it's not far away in the future. It is present here and now. But often those leaders are kind of hindered by the structural system in which they operate.
True.
And that's why you need to really distinguish the quality of the structure of an organization and how it is governed at the one side, with at the other side, what is the developmental reality and diversity in the organization. And the two rarely coincide. There are mostly tensions between the two. And systemic thinking, and more specifically understanding how systemic thinking develops within an individual and within teams, helps to understand how the system as a whole works.
I think that is a job to be done by leaders.
And that's a job to be done, indeed. But that's a very nice job to be done.
Absolutely.
We have one more question, Jan. Is Vincent?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Jan. Yes,
Okay.
I'm very interested in the different types of conversations you're talking about, and also how they correspond now to the personal level. If you see the person as a system and then the system in which they work, for example, and how they correspond. And if I would like to read a little bit, zoom in a little bit more on that, what you've been talking about today. Could I read more about that? Because, for example, to give you a very simple example, today we were talking to a client, and we're trying to set up a series of conversations to start a new project. And the conversation we had kind of a bit through email were exactly those types of conversations where you said, this is a resource bargaining thing, there's some assumptions in there. And so is this a level, a level 2 conversation, or is it now a level 3 conversation? So where are we now in the conversation? And it's really a simple email, so you can see it on kind of every level that it is happening. So the more we talk about it, it's like, oh, actually, and this probably, we assume that this probably also reflects the reality of that person working in the organization, that these types of conversations we have, she will probably help with her, will have with her colleagues. But I'm wondering, how can I learn more about how you've linked those conversations with the personal development? And
there are 3 very good books written by a colleague of mine, also member of CO, Wolfgang Lassel.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book, The Viability of Organizations, part 1, 2, and 3. It's published by Springer. in 2020. And almost at the same time, my book that I wrote together with Otto Laske, Practices of Dynamic Collaboration, appeared. And you can kind of read the two books in mirror of one another.
And is it, let's say, that practical? Because, in a way we're practitioners, so it's really about, the conversations, the questions you ask, or some of, if you would have some, if there are like examples of transcripts, so you say, okay, this is, because in the end it's about the doing. I have to say something in a conversation.
If you want a very practical approach, I developed a game with the title The Rethinking Game, which provides a series of questions that enable you to engage differently in those conversations. And that's the most practical thing. Okay, look, Miguel has it. Have you used it, Miguel? Wait, your mic.
Well, sure. Yes, a couple of times, Jan, and well, very interesting conversations and dialogues created through that. So, but still, I have to refine my and I have to dig a little bit more. But it is really, really good.
Thank you for the
tool and method. I mean, both things are here embedded.
Yeah,
it was just in time. Sorry.
Yeah. And I also provide at certain moments trainings. I have 3 types of educational activities, namely hands-on sessions. It's all to be found in the Dynamic Collaboration Academy, where you will find hands-on starters, integrated learning experiences, and deep dives. So the stuff on the conversations will be in the program on structure that will start, I think, at the end of this month. But you can find all information on my site.
So, Jan, I posted a link to, I think it was the Dynamic Collaboration website, dynamiccollaboration.app.
Yes, that's the website of the application. That's the one. But you will also find the information on my other website, connecttransform.be.
Great. Okay. Any more questions for Jan? Or we
now there is also a possibility on the master website of CEO. If you are a CEO member, you can find a assessment questionnaire to identify the different systems. I know that it was there a few years ago, and I downloaded it and found it very useful. I'm not sure that it's still to be downloaded, but if you send me a mail, I can send you a copy of the questionnaire.
Are you talking about the framework, the self-assessment framework of SIO,
yes,
it's UK?
It's on the UK website, and it's a 50-page document, I think, with a series of questions that enable you to identify the different systems, how the elements interact or do not interact, and it was for me a source of inspiration, but that's already a few years ago.
Great. Vincent, anything else?
Yeah, if nobody else wants to ask, I have another question. I'm curious about also how you develop your own thinking. So let's say we assume that a few years ago, you maybe thought certain things which now you're not so convinced of anymore. You said, no, actually, I thought this was true, but this is I think differently now. So I'm curious about how you develop your thoughts. So how was it before and what is it now? And maybe also, and related to that, a question. So, what do you think is is true for you, but other people think is not? So, this is actually a big difference from how I think to how I see other people approach things.
Okay. Well, let me think 1 minute on the first question. I developed my thinking basically in 4 stages. During my doctoral thesis, I worked closely with Cleveland University, and I co-developed the appreciative inquiry methodology together with Ron Fry and Suresh Srivastava, David Cooper-Ryder, and so on. Now, the essence of that methodology is that you can build new perspectives. We kind of developed a new way to deal with change. And simultaneously, we had 7 change projects running in organizations, which we were able to observe. So we sat at the board table, the management table, but also the team table, and spent time in the factories of the organizations. And that convinced me that change is all about storylines that are interwoven with each other. Then I had a period of 15 years where I tried to bring into practice the agreed upon best practice knowledge within human resources. With the whole human resources domain is basically focused at trying to handle the negative side effects of the Tayloristic system. Basically, the distinction between thinking and doing, and fragmenting the work into small bits to make it more manageable and scalable. A model that did not seem to fit, and human resources was invented to start motivating people again. And it was there that I met Gillian Stamp, who brought me onto the path of work levels and the layeredness of the structured reality in organizations. The first period that I acted as a consultant, I did a lot of work in career coaching between 2003 and 2007 to find out that most coaching models do not work. They have no sustainable effect. And there was only one type of programs, namely the cognitive programs, that focused on thought structures and on identity development, that had sustainable results. And it was through the work of Otto Lasker that I was able to dive deeper into it. Otto Lasker's work was very much inspired by phenomenology, by philosophy, and the constructivist approaches that followed from phenomenology, the modernistic thinking in philosophy. And during the last 15 years, more and more I got interested in complexity theory and complexity approaches. And that brought me where I am today. It's kind of the integration of the different streams that inspired me. And if you really ask where I'm thinking differently, I would say in how work can be organized differently, not around tasks, but around processes, not around behavioral strengths, but about making people aware where their own perspective taking is evolving all over their adulthood, and how diversity is kind of influencing team dynamics and team integration. So I started very much to get interested in what is it that enable teams to become winning teams. And most winning teams are teams that integrate things differently, which have a different equilibrium between the broadening and the narrowing dynamics. Can you follow me?
Yes, I'm stripping. I'm writing a lot. Ik ben alles aan het opschrijven, dus that's why I'm listening, but at the same time also writing because I would like to capture it. No,
Okay.
I'm very much enjoying. I'm very much enjoying that. So that's why I'm writing this much. So
But
you.
what now inspires me is the work of Georges Simondon. Georges Simondon is a French philosopher who asked himself what becoming is. It's a colleague that wrote most of his work in the late 50s and 60s. And he did a lot of work on individuation. It's not only the becoming of individuals, but for example, he also argumented that technology follows its own becoming process, that organizations form their own becoming process. And that basically the plan, do, act, check cycle, Gilbert Simondon, yes, that's him, that the plan, do, check, act cycle in learning only makes sense when it goes when it helps to move into a higher level of complexity handling. In most of the organizations that I know, the plan, do, check, act cycle is kind of handled in a very linear and non-developmental way, which well, creates a lot of deficiencies also in organizations. And it's through Simondon's work now that I'm building a view on what more humane organizations could be, and how organizations could foster processes of becoming, not only becoming in the market, but also how the different processes of becoming, the technological or digital becoming process, which is different from the human becoming, how that operates, how that interacts, and how it makes sense as a whole or doesn't make sense as a whole.
Yeah, maybe as a comment, yeah, I also spent maybe also several years also doing a lot of career coaching, also for MBA students. And what struck me also then, getting back to university and to feel that actually it was almost an inverted model. So basically it's an inverted headhunter model where instead of the headhunter paying for to get a new employee which functions in a corporation, I'm now paying money so I can get recruited to get an MBA with a certain outcome that I will be hired by the corporations, which have a kind of a specific need for a specific type of employee they want to hire to function in their organization. So, and I thought, so I was focusing on, let's say, the developmental part, but actually I found out that in the MBA program that was not really needed or wanted. It was really just matching those two and saying, if you increase your salary, like twofold, so then you can pay back the fees for the MBA, and that's the deal. So we shake hands, no? So I invest 50,000 euros or 100,000 euros, and over time I get twice the salary. And that's a very simple transaction, and that's what universities, at least in MBA programs, seem to do. At least that was my analysis of how this game seemed to work. And I was a bit, disappointed by the idea. I thought it was about developmental things and also the development of the person and of then the organization as such, but it seemed more like a transactional thing where they already knew what they wanted as a result.
Well, what you see is that not all, because I would not generalize, but there are certain MBA programs at the university that only share the best practices. And as a student, without knowing it, you are only getting acquainted with what narrows the conversation in companies. For example, you are taught to make a business case, following the format of a business case, or you are taught project management approaches, which do not pay attention to that developmental dimension. And so they are very much focused on the logical, analytical part. And don't understand me wrong, you need that logical and analytical part, but you also need the deeper thinking part. And that's where some of my colleagues, they haven't seen that yet.
So, Anjan, considering all the things that you have said, and I wonder, so this tendency that's a new type of organization, more volatile, more decentralized, more distributed, for example, following the information technology, and I'm an example of this. So I'm working with my brother in Spain, but with my partner that is in Senegal. We are here in Vienna right now in a peace building conference with a lot of partners. So we are a bunch of people working with different organizations at different levels where information is flowing. But I would say that we cannot apply the VSM structure into the value we produce. So I wonder if this the VSM and this 5 system and the conversation are still relevant for the new trends of people working in a decentralized way.
Well, I think it will become more and more relevant in the sense that the type of development that you see is a development from a focus on new future models to real ecosystems that are woven together. If you really want to build peace, that requires the cooperation of a lot of stakeholders that need to weave together their activities. And you can only do that if you have quite a view of how your end-to-end processes interact with the whole and enable you to create the developments that you want to create. What I often see in a lot of circles is that you have one buzzword after the other. You have transformation, digitalization, sustainability, circularity. So the conversations are populated by empty words nowadays. And it's our role to bring content to bring a spine to those words and those concepts. And you can only do that by using very sound and coherent theories, like the viable systems model is one theory. And if you are not able to share the model to really, if you, for example, would reflect upon the situation in Israel from the different layers, you will never be able to really address the situation in a way that peace will evolve, because situations, especially in areas where there's a lot of tension, are situations where people differ so much in their perspective taking and in their opinion of what needs to take place, that you can only bring them to the table by using very sound systemic ways of thinking. The alternative, for example, is that you go and make use of U theory as a change model. But that builds a lot upon the existing thought structures. While if you use complexity theory and the viable systems model, you gain direct insight into the layeredness of complexity, enabling you to handle it better, enabling you to see the broadening and the narrowing dynamics. If you are back in the conference tomorrow morning, or if you will speak in the bar in just a moment to your colleagues, focus on what gets broadened here, what gets narrowed here, what's the balance between broadening and narrowing, and what kind of thought structures can I add to the conversation to open people's minds and to start building common ground. You can only do that from sound and coherent systems thinking.
When you talk about narrowing and broadening, because it resounds me to raise a like of idea of centralization and decentralization. So to find the balance in an organization to be able to develop, to be able to be productive and sustainable, to produce and distribute wealth. That, from his point of view, is the purpose of the organization. He said that there is a balance. There should be a balance between decentralization and centralization. So it is similar to your idea of broadening and narrowing, or it is something completely different?
No, something completely different. The architecture of centralization and decentralization, that is that you start looking at the interrelationship of roles reporting into one another. And what is essential there is that there is an optimal distance between the roles. Otherwise, centralization nor decentralization will work. And even the balance that you might have in mind will not work. The broadening and narrowing dynamics happen within the person versus the role. I can narrow my perspective on my role. I can broaden my perspective on my role. It happens within the team. We can narrow the team challenge. We can broaden the team challenge. It happens within business units that need to work with each other and that can narrow or broaden there. It can also happen vertically, that the boss over narrows versus the direct reports that over broadens the topic, and then your model of centralization and decentralization will also not work. So it's a kind of a perspective that enables you to understand what kind of integration takes place or does not take place, and what is the real quality of decision making. That's what we need to understand in organizational functioning.